It's Friday. Today we're going to learn the square root method. This will be a method we learn to solve quadratics, specifically ones that are missing that bx term. So what that means is you're going to have like x squared plus 9 equals 0 or something like that. So it's not going to have that x value in the middle. So you can only use the square root method when it's missing that bx term and not any other time. So this method is only usable some of the time, but it is the best method when you can't use it. All right, so let's first start out by talking about square root of 100. You guys reduced radicals yesterday, so you know square root of 100 is 10, but actually the square root of 100 is both positive 10 and negative 10, because positive 10 times positive 10 is 100, and negative 10 times negative 10 is also 100. So you actually have that positive and negative answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to start solving quadratics, which are going to have x's. Oops, this should be x squared. They're going to have x squareds in there. And you're going to end up with two routes. You're going to end up with a positive x and a negative x, but we solve it this way. We say absolute value of x. Because the absolute value of x, if you remember, we did a positive route and a negative route. So we're trying to get this positive negative x, but we can't go straight to it. We have to do the absolute value route to sort of force that, especially if there's a number attached to this x, or if it's like x plus 5 or something like that. So we can't do it in our heads. So we're going to do absolute value and then do a positive and a negative route. All right, so let's go ahead and do a couple of the nice answers. I split this lesson into 2 days. These are just going to be nice questions. The ones tomorrow will be a little more challenging. Okay, so what you're going to do to solve these is you're going to do the same thing you do for absolute value. You're going to isolate this x squared by removing loosely attached and firmly attached. Move this 16 over. So you're going to get x squared equals 16. And then once your x squared is isolated, you're going to square root it, which is why it's called the square root method. Square root both sides. The square root of x squared is the absolute value of x, because x times x is x squared. I'm not sure if it's positive or negative, so that absolute value takes into account those double signs. And the square root of 16 is 4. Once you get better at these, you probably can kind of skip this step, but we know that absolute value has two different answers. So you would do a positive route and you would do a negative route, which in this case just means that x equals plus or minus 4. This is actually a thing you're going to need to memorize. It's just called plus or minus. It means the positive 4 and the negative 4. So x equals positive negative 4. And I'm just going to graph that real quick to show what that means. That means it should cross at positive 4 and at negative 4. And then we know that the c value here is the y-intercept, so that's down here at negative 16. This graph would look like this. Well, that's terrible, but whatever. This graph would look like this. It would have two answers at positive 4 and at negative 4. Absolute value always has two answers when it has a positive answer. Remember, when absolute value equals 0, you have one solution. And when absolute value equals a negative number, you have no solution. So these are going to follow the same sort of rules. If your x squared equals a positive number, it's going to give you two answers. If your x squared equals 0, you'll have one answer. If your x squared equals a negative number, you're going to have a no solution. Okay? All right, moving on over to this guy. Again, I want to get the x squared isolated, so I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2 on both sides. I get x squared equals 4. Once you get that, square root both sides, absolute value x equals square root of 4 is 2. But don't forget, I'm going to do the positive route, and the negative route really means I'm going to have a positive 2 and a negative 2. I'm going to have plus or minus 2. Okay, if I were to graph this guy as well, he would also cross at positive 2 and negative 2, and then he also crosses at negative 4 or whatever. If you had a calculator, we would do this in class, but otherwise, just know the fact that I do have two answers almost always, and in these simple cases, it's usually sort of the positive and negative of the same number. All right, so let's go ahead and do another one. This one, again, isolate x squared. I'm going to move that positive 18 over by subtracting 18, so I'm going to end up with x squared equals 0. How many solutions should I have? I should only have one solution. So let's go ahead and square root both sides. I'm going to get absolute x equals the square root of 0 is 0. Doing my positive negative route, positive 0 and negative 0 is the exact same thing. So you just get x equals 0. So one solution and you're done. And you can always double check your answers again by just plugging both answers back in. So 0 squared is 0, 18 equals 18, that's correct. On the previous one, we had two separate answers. You would plug in one answer first, check it, plug in the other answer, check it. Okay, moving on over to this guy. Again, isolate this guy, so minus 12 over. So you're going to get x squared equals negative 7. You should know directly that absolute value cannot equal a negative. There's no solution, but I'll go ahead and square root. I'm going to get absolute x equals, but there's nothing that can multiply to give you a negative 7 because 2 times 2 is positive 4 and negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. There's no way to get a negative, so there's nothing that works here, but you have to write no real solution because there are, and you'll learn in Algebra 2, there are actually two imaginary solutions. There's always two solutions for every quadratic. Anything with degree 2 has two solutions. Mathematically, the highest degree is how many solutions there are in a problem. So a cubic has 3 solutions, etc. So even though this guy has no real solutions, he has to have 2 solutions total. So he does have 2 imaginary solutions. But for now, just pick no real solution, and that's all you gotta do. So just to recap, if x squared ends up equaling a positive number, you're going to have 2 solutions, 2 real solutions. If you get x squared equals 0, you're going to have 1 real solution. And if you get x squared equal to a negative number, you're going to have no real solutions. So I would always, just before you actually go ahead and square root it, just make a mental note. Okay, 2 answers, 1 answer, no answer. That way at the end, you make sure you give me the correct number of answers. All right, so on to more complicated problems. Again, isolate the x squared. So I'm going to add this 11 over. So I'm going to end up with 3x squared equals 18. I have to have x squared isolated. Do not square root here. Firstly, because 3 does not have a perfect square root. But secondly, it doesn't work out. So you've got to move this guy over. So divide by 3, divide by 3. You're going to get x squared equals 6. Okay, now that I've isolated, I know I'm going to have 2 different answers. So I'm going to go ahead and square root, square root. I'm going to get absolute x equals, well, the square root of 6 is just the square root of 6. So that guy's stuck there. Don't forget, though, that because I just have an x, I would do a positive route and a negative route. So I would have a positive and a negative root 6. So you're done. That's your answer. X equals positive negative root 6. Obviously, if you were to find that decimal approximation, you would have positive and negative because it's the same radical. Roughly 2.45. You just type in square root 6. Okay? In word problems, you'll usually have decimal answers. If you're just solving mathematically, if I were giving you a test in this chapter, I would say I always want this answer, but this is how I'd want an answer for a word problem. So. All right, this one again, isolate that x squared, so I'm going to minus 9. So I'm going to get negative 16x squared equals negative 9. Which normally you go, oh, I have a negative, that will give me no real solution, but I'm going to be dividing by negative 16, so that's going to cancel out that negative. So I'm going to have x squared equals 9/16. So I do have x squared equals a positive number, so we're good to go there, and I'm just going to square root both sides. Okay, absolute x equals, and we did learn radical rules. You could divide here, but obviously they don't reduce. So square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 16 is 4, so there's that. But don't forget that the absolute value of x is going to give me a positive route and a negative route, so I do need to have 2 separate answers, so positive and negative plus or minus 3/4. I went ahead and just made up one more because the ones I had on the notes were not super difficult. So we're going to go ahead again, isolate x squared. I'm going to add 7. Also, if any time that you want to stop this video and beat me to it, that would be fantastic. I want to make sure you guys are getting the most out of it. Obviously, we don't have a note sheet. My printer at home does not work very well, so I can't even make a note sheet for me to print out. But you just got to follow along and just, be responsible. All right, again, x squared, so divide by 4, divide by 4. X squared equals, if you divide this, you get 48. Okay, same process. It's positive. I'm going to have 2 different answers, so square root, absolute x equals, and again, you probably can skip this stage once you get better at it, but for now, I'm just going to keep doing it. And root 48 actually is reducible. I know you could do the factor tree, it's got 2 in it, but I know that 48 is 16 times 3. So it's a root 16 times a root 3. Well, root 16 is a 4, and then root 3 is just stuck as is. And don't forget, absolute value required to do a positive route and negative route, so plus or minus 4 root 3. And you'll be doing this a whole bunch tomorrow, actually Monday rather, on your messier answers. But thankfully I do have my notes from last semester, so instead of having to write this out in pencil, I can just cover up my answers from last year. Alright, so we're going to just do 2 baby word problems and then be done. Alright, so you drop a towel from a balcony 18 feet above your den onto a table that is 3 feet above the ground. How long is the towel in the air? So obviously it's a word problem, we've got to find our own equation. Hopefully, I know enough time has passed, it's probably a little shady, but hopefully you remember that dropping is projectile motion, so it's going to be h equals negative 16t squared, and then that plus t is your initial velocity, which in our case is 0, and then plus the number at the end is how high off the ground you are. So here's our equation. And normally we'd say how long till it hits the ground, but it's actually landing on a table 3 feet above the ground, so the height is going to be 3 instead of 0. But I mean, it could be either way, depending on the wording of the question. So here's our equation. We're just going to go ahead and isolate our x squared, or our t squared. So I'm going to minus 18 over, so I'm going to have negative 15 equals negative 16t squared. Divide by negative 16 on both sides, and you are going to get 15/16 equals t squared. You're going to square root both sides, square root both sides. You're going to get t equals positive negative, I'm skipping the absolute value step. Square root of 15 is just square root of 15. Square root of 16 is 4. So there's your answer if you wanted exact answers. I'm going to go just steal the decimal answers. So here's those two. The decimal answers would be a positive 0.97 and a negative 0.97, but obviously in real life time can't be negative, so you would only use that positive answer, so positive 0.97 seconds. Alright, last one. Find the radius of a circle with an area of 144 pi square inches. So pretty small example here. So find the radius of a circle with area. So obviously the area of a circle is pi r squared. Well, it told me the area is 144 pi, so the area is 144 pi, and then the formula is pi r squared. It wants me to find the radius, which is the r stuck in the r squared. So just like normal, get the r squared alone, so divide by pi, which is kind of like a variable, but obviously it's a number. It's going to cancel. You get 144 equals r squared. I'm going to square root both sides, boom, bada boom, and I get r equals, again, I skipped the absolute value. I'm going to get positive negative 12, but you can't actually have a radius of negative 12, so the answer is 12 inches. Okay. Also, final note that I just decided I'm going to go ahead and add these YouTube videos, the links into the extra resource pages. That way, I know once you submit the quiz, you can't go back and look at it. I think that's how it works. So I want to have the video links available. So if you need to go back and watch the video again or see an example, again, it's not sort of hidden from you. So I'll do that in the extra resource page, and I will see you guys again Monday, and just feel free to email me or anything anytime. All right, be safe.